Mommy told me never to go in the basement, but I wanted to see what was making that noise. It kind of sounded like a puppy, and I wanted to see the puppy, so I opened the basement door and tiptoed down a bit. I didn't see a puppy, and then mommy yanked me out of the basement and yelled at me. Mommy had never yelled at me before, and it made me sad and I cried. Then mommy told me never to go into the basement again, and she gave me a cookie. That made me feel better, so I didn't ask her why the boy in the basement was making noises like a puppy, or why he had no hands or feet. When I was younger I used to live by the woods and could see a cemetery from my back porch. One Easter I remember waking up and seeing the Easter bunny, one of those terrifying costumes, and what really gets me is I remember smelling the wet hay. When I woke up I didn't tell anyone, but there was an extra Easter egg in my house that my parents didn't hide. Years later when I was in high school I asked my parents if they ever dressed up like the Easter bunny and came into our room. They said they would never go through so much trouble. Then my younger sister, who I shared a bunk bed with when this happened, said she remembers when the Easter bunny came into our room and made a remark about the hay smell. I was terrified that we both remembered seeing a person dressed as a bunny in our room. To make it even stranger, I told the friends I sat with at lunch what happened. One of the girls was my neighbor across the street. She told me one Easter a long time she looked out her window during the night and saw the Easter bunny standing in her driveway. I had chills. To this day I'm terrified of people in rabbit costumes. When my niece was really young, she was in a bouncer at my sister's house. I was house and babysitting. I had left her to go to the kitchen to grab some water. My sister's chocolate labs were probably sniffing and licking her head because I could hear her giggling like she was having a blast. I hadn't noticed how cold it had gotten. Then I heard it, a loud wooden snap, like a thick piece of wood had been snapped in half. Suddenly or a tree was knocked over. I ran into the room and what I saw and smelled freaked me out. The dogs were huddled in the corner whimpering. My niece was just staring at the ceiling corner with wide eyes, and it was cold and smelled like Stetson. I took her and we decided to go to a different room. When my sister finally came home, I told her what happened. She just rolled her eyes and said, "That is who?" I was confused. She said who was the previous owner of the house who had died 10 years before his wife sold it. She said he likes to follow my niece around and you can tell it's him because the dogs freak. It gets cold and smells like cheap cologne. I don't believe in that shit, but I do believe that feeling you get in your gut when something doesn't feel right. In college I would go home every other weekend to work at the job I had since high school. I would drive directly from campus after my last class on Friday to my job, about an hour, and after my shift was done, I'd go back to my parents' house which was out in the middle of nowhere. My parents weren't yet home when I got back from work. They often spent their Friday and Saturday evenings drinking like they were the ones in college, so the house was dark, and since it was mid-fall so was the yard, save for the yard light. I pulled into my normal parking spot, got out of the car and then turned to open the back door of my car and get my backpack out of the back seat. That's when I noticed that the bathroom light was on. Was that light on when I pulled up? It must have been right. As I was contemplating the light and reaching for my backpack, there was suddenly a very angry looking old woman standing in the window staring at me. We are not talking resting bitch face here either. She was pissed off at me and I knew it. We stood there staring at each other for a good 10 seconds when my parents pulled into the driveway and distracted me from my stare down with the woman in the bathroom. By the time I turned back, the light was still on, but the woman was gone. I used to volunteer at a nursing home where we had several instances where new residents accurately described former residents down to specific nightgowns or color of glasses who I and the staff knew had died in that room and complain about them coming into the room at night. Then once I was walking through the hallway and it was normally uncomfortably warm inside but I felt a chill and goosebumps. One of the CNAs said I had just walked through a ghost. I couldn't get warm again for the rest of the day. There were flickering lights and TVs turning themselves on. Several of the staff were from the same Southeast Asian country and they were talking about ghosts and disrespect for the dead so much that management had someone come in to do a candlelight ceremony and this lady with crystals and dreadlocks came in to do a sage brushing. Things calmed down after that. Lights stayed on better and the residents seemed calmer. I was a caretaker of a small uninhabited island off the coast of Maine, and my girlfriend and I started having synchronized nightmares about things that we had never discussed before. They involved very specific themes, and after a month of this happening we were gifted a history book of the island that had a small chapter in the back that mentioned the exact hauntings. A good friend of mine, while doing his rounds as a young intern, he is now a neurosurgeon. He had just looked in on a dying patient. After making the patient comfortable, he exited the room, sat on a nearby chair to write his report. After a few minutes he looked up and saw this patient walking down the hallway. He called to the woman, but there was no response. As he stood up to walk after her, she disappeared. He quickly walked toward the patient's room and saw a light under the door. When he opened the door, it was completely dark in the room. So he turned on the night light, went over to the patient and felt for her pulse. She had died. He swears to this experience. A few weeks after my mom gave birth to me, she went to me in the middle of the night because I was crying. When she went in the room, she saw a dark figure of a man who she thought was my dad holding me and decided to go back to sleep. In the morning she thanks my dad for taking care of me. As it turns out, my dad was not even awake then and nobody else was in the apartment. Gets worse later on in life. Not only me, but my sister, cousins and friends have all seen it somewhere in our home. All in separate accounts, and we don't normally tell people about it unless they've seen it, and it follows us wherever we move to, and at this point me and my family have learned to ignore it, though we all know it's there. When I was 12, me and my mom were watching TV in her bedroom. It was one of those really stuffy summer evenings. Stating the obvious, I said aloud, "It is so hot in here." Immediately, the fan that was sitting on the dresser 5 feet away turned on. The switch couldn't really be flipped on by accident. It was pretty sticky and required a little bit of force to go from off to on. I can't really explain how that happened, but I like to think it was a friendly ghost. In middle school, my friend was in a church youth group and they often had these overnights at the church that he would invite me to, and they were actually tons of fun. Towards the end of the night, the guy who ran it, he was chill if the Lord was with that guy, would let us play manhunt in the entire church area, place where actual mass was held, kitchen, rec hall, nursery, etc. We turned literally every light in the whole place and all we had were tiny flashlights. It was spooky but so much fun. One of these nights we were playing and we decided to hide in a closet in the nursery. We hid there for about 10 minutes and out of nowhere we heard a baby crying. We got spooked the fuck out and bolted out of there. In the morning we went back to the nursery to see what could have caused it. We figured it was one of those toy baby dolls that would cry, but we found nothing. Still spooks me to this day, but I would give anything to relive it because I love paranormal shit. Played piano in a dark and empty auditorium back in the day. When I was finished, someone softly clapped for me. Sort of sounded like it was coming from everywhere, but just one person. Never saw them, and the auditorium was locked except for the door I came in. This was actually on Halloween morning one year. I lived in a small apartment with an open floor plan where you could see the entire apartment from the kitchen. I was in the kitchen packing my lunch to take to work when the TV turned on by itself, volume on full blast, to some staticky channel that kept cutting in and out. I was nowhere near the remote or the TV, and had no other people or animals living with me who could have done it accidentally. Probably not the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I'm sure there are many perfectly reasonable explanations as to how it happened, but it definitely freaked me out at the time. It had never happened before and hasn't since. I grew up in a small town and lived out in the country. My mom and I were coming home from Walmart really late one night and decided to take the back way home. I still had my learner's permit, so I wanted to take a road with less traffic. Anyone who has ever lived or been to the country knows how creepy these roads can be at night. I was going around a curve, right before a one-lane bridge, so I slowed down in case I had to stop. Out of nowhere this woman jumps in front of me to the driver's side of my car and starts pounding on the hood of my car. Her mouth was moving but I couldn't make out what she was saying. My mom started freaking out and told me not to stop and just keep driving. I kept going and we both looked back to see where she was and no one was there. To this day my mom and I still remember it clearly. Turns out there's apparently a legend about a woman who died around the bridge and supposedly can be seen sometimes late at night. I get goosebumps to this day just thinking about it. I saw something crouched in the road driving around one night. Its eyes glowed when my headlights hit it, so I assumed an animal of some sort. But when I got within about 15 feet of it, it stood up and looked like a girl standing there. I slammed on my brakes immediately, but suddenly the road was just empty. My friend in the car hadn't seen anything, but asked me a few minutes later if it looked like a girl. He'd apparently seen something similar with his sister a few weeks before in the exact same spot. I was out partying with my friends and came home pretty late. I didn't want my parents asking questions, so I snuck in through the garage. The door was locked, but I had a key. I turned the key to unlock it, but then I heard an abrupt snap and the door locked again. I repeated this 3 times. Each time I unlocked the door re-locked. Exasperated, I cried out, "Mom, it's me." Then I heard the door unlock. I opened the door and no one was there. About a year ago, I was up watching movies late at night when I got hungry and went downstairs for a snack. My room is across from my daughter's room and her door was open. As I was coming back upstairs, I start turning left towards my room when I hear, clear as ever, "Daddy, can you close the door?" I turn around, don't say much and just close it. Once I'm back in my room, I lie down to watch TV when it hits me. My daughter isn't there. She's spending the night at my parents'. I get up and go to her room and sure enough, it's empty. I woke up my wife and she thinks I'm crazy. Says I was probably tired and maybe it was the TV. I remember the voice so clear and coming in the direction of her room. It's very possible that it was just my head playing games, but it definitely made me question a few things. When I was about 12 or 13, I woke up in the middle of the night and smelled my father's cologne. Thought it was a little odd since he lived about an hour away but was too tired to care. Went back to sleep. Woke up the next morning and for some reason my mother didn't wake me up for school. My father had passed away the night before. Never told anyone for years about that night, but around the age of 23 I told my mom. She was glad to know that she wasn't crazy. That same night she got startled awake, and the dog was staring at the door wagging his tail, almost like he was saying goodbye before fully leaving. I was 6 and remember playing in my room and my grandpa walks in and talks to me for a few minutes. After a bit he gets up and tells me to be a good girl for my mom, kisses me on the forehead, and walks out. Mom comes in about 5 minutes later hysterical and told me my grandpa had died overnight and we had to leave to go be with her family 2 states over where he lived. In Birmingham, England, a 20-year-old woman returned from a dance with a friend on the evening of May 27th. After parting ways with her companion, the young woman never reached home. The next morning, she was discovered assaulted and murdered in Eddington Park. Although a man named Thornton was charged with the crime, he was acquitted. The murder was never solved. The young victim's name was Mary Ashford, and the story took place in 1817. And again in 1974 with a victim named Barbara Forrest. These 2 girls met their fates 157 years apart under bizarrely similar circumstances. Neither of their killers was ever brought to justice. Doctors at a hospital in Medellin, Colombia were presented with a patient who was in bad shape. The 41-year-old man was HIV positive and off his medication, was having breathing problems, and was dealing with a tapeworm infection. Tumors on his lungs indicated that the breathing trouble was likely due to previously undetected cancer, but there was something odd about the tumors. As one of the man's doctors put it, it looked like cancer, but the tumors were composed of cells that were not human. The tumors, which had attacked the man's lungs, liver and adrenal glands, were confirmed by DNA testing to be composed of tapeworm cells. Apparently the man's compromised immune system had allowed a non-human invertebrate form of cancer to take hold in his body. Doctors were unsure how to approach treatment, but they never got the chance to try. Within 72 hours of his bizarre diagnosis, the patient was dead. When an Illinois woman's purse went missing from her home one evening, her boyfriend decided to review the footage from the home's multi-camera security system to pinpoint where she had misplaced it. As the couple watched footage of themselves sleeping on the couch in the foreground, their blood ran cold as an intruder emerged on the recording at the top of the stairs. He was holding the purse. Standing motionless, the man watched the couple as they slept, For 15 solid minutes, the door to their balcony had been left unlocked, which was the only way the intruder could have entered. Although nothing was stolen except the woman's purse, one can imagine the supreme unease that must linger after watching that eerie footage, especially considering that the man has not been caught. As two young hikers got ready for an easy jaunt through a park in Arizona during the day, a cloud suddenly appeared on the horizon. The cloud of thousands of angry swarming bees immediately seemed to zero in on one unfortunate 23-year-old man. As his horrified companion watched, the man was set upon by the entire swarm. A fellow hiker and a pair of park rangers were unable to even approach the man, who was completely enveloped by bees. Responders reported that the man was still covered with bees when he was loaded into an emergency vehicle. The entire swarm even pursued the responders as they rushed him to the hospital. Upon arrival, the swarm had finally dissipated enough for the man to be treated, but only because the bees had done their job. The man died shortly thereafter. Responding to a tip from a local fisherman, 2 Utah police officers discovered an overturned car in the frigid waters of a river outside the town of Spanish Fork. Suddenly, they were shocked to hear a voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from the car. "Help me," it called. And indeed, they did find someone alive in the vehicle, an 18-month-old girl who most certainly had not called for help. Her young mother, whom police later determined had simply run off the road for no apparent reason, was dead in the front seat. Certainly she had not called for help either. So who did? The voice wasn't just in our heads, it was plain as day. "I remember hearing a voice that didn't sound like a child, just saying help me," explained one of the officers. Despite hanging upside down for 14 hours in the bitter cold with no food or water, the child survived thanks largely to her mysterious guardian. For one Pennsylvania couple who wanted to put new insulation in their recently purchased older home, their renovation became the stuff of horror movies as they uncovered the insulation that was already in place. Throughout the walls, there were spices and other odd items amid the carcasses of dozens of animals wrapped in tattered newspapers from nearly a century ago. Cleanup of the grisly find was not covered by their homeowner's insurance because the problem, obviously, predated their policy. As a result, the family was forced to remove the mess themselves at their own cost. Local historians say the items are of the type that would have been used in old Dutch magic, which doesn't make living in the house any less creepy, nor does the smell, which won't go away, and the fact that some of the walls have not been renovated yet. In a suburban neighborhood of Chattanooga, Tennessee, there was a well-kept house occupied by 2 elderly men. Neighbors hadn't seen the identical twin brothers for some time, although the lawn was well maintained and the mail never piled up. Family members had last attempted to check on them a few years earlier but had been unable to gain entry. The pair normally kept to themselves. When police finally forced their way in to do a welfare check at the insistence of neighborhood residents, they were met with an eerie sight: the skeletal remains of the 2 brothers, side by side in their respective easy chairs. They had apparently died as they had lived, in isolation, and so they remained silently sharing each other's company for over 3 years until they were discovered. No signs of foul play were found, which does nothing to make this story any less creepy. After one Pennsylvania family's purchase of their $1.3 million dream home, letters began arriving at the home from someone calling themselves the Watcher. And indeed this person seemed to be watching. The unknown person writing the letters claimed that the home had been the subject of their family for decades, whatever that means, and that they had been put in charge of watching and waiting for its second coming, whatever that means. The letter writer began asking unsettling questions like, have they found what's in the walls yet? They also expressed their pleasure to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. An investigation by local police yielded nothing. As for the family, they moved out immediately and filed suit against the previous owners of the house. Similar troubles began for a Washington family when their teenage daughter's phone began sending texts by itself. The family's devices began to turn against them as an anonymous scratchy-voiced stalker whom the family dubbed Restricted began calling with details of where they had been, what they were wearing, and what they were doing at that very moment. He said he was going to cut their throats. As if that weren't enough, the caller played back recorded snippets of private conversations between family members. Even the family's private conversation with a local police detective was somehow recorded and played back. All the family members have been thoroughly investigated. Their cell phones have also been analyzed, all to no avail. The stalker or stalkers have still not been identified. Neither has a potential motive nor even the means by which this harassment was carried out. I heard one. A father is laying in bed after just waking up. He grabs the baby monitor and walks to his desk in his office at home. He has his baby on the baby monitor and hears his wife singing to her. He cracks a smile as he hears his wife, "Go to sleep, go to sleep," when suddenly the front door opens up and his wife comes in with groceries. I check into small hotel a few kilometers from Kyiv. It is late. I'm tired. I tell woman at desk I want a room. She tells me room number and give key. But one more thing, comrade, there is one room without number and always lock. Don't even peek in there. I take key and go to room to sleep. Night comes and I hear trickling of water. It comes from the room across. I cannot sleep, so I open door. It is coming from room with no number. I pound on door. No response. I look in keyhole. I see nothing except red. Water still trickling. I go down to front desk to complain. By the way, who is in that room? She look at me and begin to tell story. There was woman in there, murdered by her husband, skin all white, except her eyes, which were red.
Cowbelly, let's go, baby.
Demonetization is dropping your eating to stop a migration of top innovation and content creation in an opposite way. I saw your new status and got inspiration to drop a new cake. On top of your face is a mock and the face of the clock is still raising. Mod is impatient, a monster is late, cannot just escape. News drop like a cave. YouTube Ukraine, you thought you would make it. Asked all the creators who want to get paid for their awesome creation. So take the advice of a god and make it. All I got to say is Cowbelly TV gets more traffic than a metropolis. Yes bitch, that's me. And I'm still looking for where my profit is.